You're not responsible. It was wrong. Reach out to me. We'll connect you.
I will never see, speak, or hear from Aaron Smith Levin for the rest of my life.
I've been raised since the age of 4 to follow orders, do as I was told, or risk losing everything.
If we speak out, that's the only way they're going to get the strength to have the courage to do the same.
Why the hell does someone have to escape to get out of a religion?
I'm still shocked by the evil. This is pure evil at work.
It's part 2 of Tony Ortega as I continue this celebration of a year of podcasting. Some people notably admitted yesterday I didn't get to say because I have a lot on my mind, but like Brandy and Princess Morgan over on Twitter were really supportive in the beginning. Of course, Cam Ferrari, one of my first most supported Twitter friends, talented artist. You got to check her out. I said all this at the end of yesterday's show, but I forgot to unmute my mic, so there's this really long, awkward silence before the ending credits, the whole intro thing on the outro. Wow, so much going on the last 72 hours to a week. It's been crazy. A lot of social media going on that I'm trying to sort through in my own head a little bit here. The more public I get, the more vocal I get, the more I see crap thrown at me, and I understand that's going to be part of the package, and I knew what I was getting into. But something that's been thrown around a lot recently in some of my social media circles, because I'm very vocal. I'm not one of those private radio guys that goes onto the podcast and never talks to anyone, maybe occasionally answers your tweet. I'm very involved. And when that happens, I get involved in things where I find my name as part of something that I'm not necessarily participating in. One such thing would be a term that's been floating around of cut a hoe. Now, against my better judgment, I've been told by people I respect, a lot of people suggest it, you don't just address it, just don't even acknowledge it. But I have to. I'm going to go ahead right now. Before we get started here, I got Phil Jones doing his billboard dedication in LA tomorrow a little bit, and then part 2 of Tony Ortega. But first, let's address the hoe in the room. See, first, before we address the term cut a hoe, we first must look at the hoe itself. Are we talking about a strong, sturdy hoe that's reliable? Are we talking about one of those dirty old hoes you can find really cheap on any street corner? Because those dirty old hoes you can find on any street corner that are really cheap, you really wouldn't even notice if you cut them, right? I mean, you got to think, the old, sturdy, thick wood handle on those classic old dirty hoes, you couldn't even tell in that wood grain that they have cuts on them. And you could probably, I would assume, you can cut them all you want, and you wouldn't even notice. I mean, they still do the job. But hey, gardening's not my forte. That's just my opinion. So that's how I feel about that whole thing. And that's how serious I take that interaction. But in all seriousness, I, on this show, I, in my life, and I, in my social media personalities, have never once advocated or been okay with the suggestion of violence or inciting of anger and hate. I think to take things that people say, twist them around and throw them back at you to make it wrong or bad is inciting hatred and violence. And it's a vicious cycle that needs to stop. But to suggest that I'm okay with that, or as someone has said, ambivalent, quote unquote, you obviously don't know anything about what I've been doing the last few months, and I recommend listening and doing a little binge listening to come get some self-promotion, but true. In the meantime, there is more I want to say about this whole thing. It's in the description. I was going to address the whole idea of the anti-Scientology cult, which was kind of a phrase I think coined by Marty Rathbun that can be a little frustrating, but I do want to address that. And also, when I talk about people who supported me and people that I want to thank as part of this podcast, I want to thank the people who supported me in this effort to speak out and allow people to speak out and have a voice about the things that are wrong with Scientology. I've said many times, again, this speaks to that whole idea of where I'm coming from is I've never been an anti-Scientologist. I'm anti-Scientology because what it does to Scientologists, what it does to ex-Scientologists, to Scientologist family members in disconnection. It's a lot of badness, and that word insidious that Bert Leahy puts out there is very true and very real, and bears minding. So thank you to all the people who I associate with on social media who have supported the show and continue to take the brunt, almost sometimes on my behalf, which I feel terrible for. But you guys are there for me, and I will continue to be there for you. I won't condone it if you say things threatening to people and all that. And I think sometimes if you feel like someone is mentally unstable, which happens, there's going to be levels of PTSD. There's going to be people who are a little eccentric that may not be on the wrong side, or just are having some problems. If you really believe that, by the way, I've been accused of this. I've never called anybody mentally disabled, but I get word back that I'm saying that about people. But I've suggested someone might be troubled, which I think if you're associating with Scientology and influenced strongly by Scientology, you are troubled. If you need help and you're not getting the help you need, you are troubled. So let's put everything in perspective. Things get twisted. We know it's going to happen. Most people who know me from the last few months, who know me from interactions personally, you know. I don't need to explain this any farther, and I won't. But I'll address the anti-Scientology cult thing at the end of the show, because in my 10 questions with Tony, I mentioned something similar or related, and it kind of confused Tony, and I want to clarify that at the end, what I meant by it. And it'll just actually, in and of itself, will explain what I mean by that. So without further ado, I got in touch with Phil Jones to talk about tomorrow's dedication. If you're in the LA area, a couple of blocks from the Big Blue building, the Call Me sign dedication is going to happen with Phil Jones and his family and all the people who support him. Here it is. All right. If you've been following the story of Scientology at all, you should know a little bit about this guy. If you don't even know his name, you know what he's been doing because you've seen the pictures everywhere on Twitter and social media, or you've seen the billboards in your town. This is the guy that's putting up the Call Me signs on the billboards. Phil Jones. How you doing, Phil?
I'm doing real good, Chris. Thanks for having me on.
No problem. I want to make sure we promote this because I know that as of this airing on Friday, the 17th, on Saturday the 18th, they'll be doing an event where the new Call Me sign is being put up.
Right at 10:30 a.m., just across the street from the billboard, which is at 4301 Sunset Boulevard in Los Angeles. It won't be a big event, I don't think. I mean, although I said that last time we did one in L.A. and there was press from all over that showed up. But this is our third billboard, so we'll see. I mean, there have been a number of people that say they're coming out to it, so hopefully we'll get at least a good little crowd. And we'll do a little dedication to the billboard and hopefully get the word out there a little bit.
Well, what happens at these dedications? Is there like a speech? Is there some conversation? People just meet each other?
Well, usually I'll say a few words, nothing long. I'm not really a long-winded type individual anyway, so I'll just say a few words. There's a list of some of the people who, have been disconnected from their families for quite some time, and I might read a little bit off that list. There's a list out there of about 350 people that have family disconnections going on. I'm sure there's thousands of them out there, but the list of 350, I've got a list of maybe a dozen that I'll read from, just to let people know how long these families have been broken up by Scientology.
Now, on this billboard, it's a collage of faces of, I'm guessing, all the people who disconnected, all the people's family members.
Yeah, it is a representation for all the thousands of families that have been broken up by Scientology. Originally, when we were doing the billboard, my wife and I, it was for our kids. We had, some pictures of our kids. We were going to do we had no other way of getting a hold of them. We tried for some years phoning, going down there. If we went down to their building, security would say, you're not welcome here. They wouldn't allow any message through, whether it was written, phone, or anything. So we decided to do a billboard, and we originally were going to do it for our two kids, who are both in the Sea Organization. One of them works for the Author Services, which is their L. Ron Hubbard fiction books. our son works for Celebrity Center in Los Angeles, and they've both been in the Sea Org for about 20 years or more now. So, but we haven't seen them for at least, our son for about 3 years and our daughter longer than that. So anyway, we were putting up the billboard, and we didn't have enough ourselves to pay for it, so we set up a GoFundMe account. And then we started to get all these messages from people along with donations about how their family was broken up by Scientology, and hadn't seen my son in 23 years. A 10-year-old girl sent $5 because she lost her sister to Scientology disconnection. I mean, the stories were just so sad that we decided to change it up and make it for all the families who have lost, friends, relatives to Scientology disconnection.
That right there, what you pointed out, that example is one of those things that drives me crazy about this connection. Is I have Aaron Smith-Levin coming on next week, and we talk about his daughters and how they have that relationship with their grandparents, and that these children that have absolutely nothing to do with anything are being punished because of this kind of thing is ridiculous. So these faces, did you have to get permission to put these faces on there from family members?
No, what we did is we had them blurred so they're not recognizable.
Okay.
Originally they were clear, but we kind of went back and forth with the graphic artist, and until we had something that, didn't show up, because otherwise we'd have to get permission from each and every person that was on that billboard. And, so we just blurred the faces so that it wasn't recognizable. And it was for the message anyway. It was just the message being, to my loved one in Scientology, call me. And really that's the gist of the message, just to try to reconnect families.
Yeah, it's a direct way. I mean, because you can't get messages to a lot of them, and they can't miss that billboard.
And this one is closer to any of the buildings. Like we had one originally in Echo Park, and it got a lot of views from people, but not so many from Scientologists, I suppose. And then the one in Clearwater was a little ways away from the buildings, as close as we could get it. But this one, you can actually see their media productions building from the billboard, and it's only a couple of blocks from their big blue complex in Los Angeles. And right up the street is where they do what they call body riding, where they go out and grab people to bring them into their churches to see if they can recruit them. So they're in a panic on this. I mean, they've been calling all our relatives, and I mean, they were going so far as to call my sister's ex-husband in Canada, who I haven't talked to in probably 25 years, to have him call me up to see if he could, find out, what's going on, see if we can shut it down. They called my wife's twin brother's ex-wife, and I mean, they've even tried to get a hold of our granddaughter, which is really going across the line. I mean, they cross lines all the time, but that one for us is terrible. I mean, they've called so many people just trying to get us shut down and to discredit us, and they're on a campaign right now against us to see if they can stop the billboard. But they're in a panic because it's so close to their headquarters.
And what is it that they're telling these family members? What are they expecting them to come back to you with to prevent you from putting up these billboards?
Well, they're actually trying to dig up any dirt on us. I mean, they asked one of our family members, what crimes has Phil committed? It's like
just like that.
They're just like that. They have no idea how there's in such a bubble that they don't have any idea what it's like on the outside. They ask these questions because that's according to Hubbard's technology or whatever, that if somebody's criticizing the church, they must have crimes. So they're trying to see if we have anything in our background that they can kind of either blackmail us for or use as leverage or whatever. But last year I went and had a background check for a job, and the one thing that came up was from, I think, 15, 20 years ago, where I had a taillight out on my car and got a ticket for that. And so if they're looking for something, I'm the last guy to walk into a bank or something and rob it. Or, I'm just not the criminal type.
Right. They're not gonna find much.
No.
That's good. It's kind of interesting that they do that, and that they basically they're convincing these people, right? These children, these family members, and it's always children, it's other family members. They convince them that there is something wrong with you, and that's why you're rejecting the church.
Exactly. They can never look at themselves to see if there's something wrong with what they are doing. It's always the other person who's criticizing, and if they are criticizing, they obviously have hidden crimes that they need to uncover. And they won't stop. They'll just keep on going. But also when they ask those questions of relatives and friends, it's partly to discredit, too. They go, so I guess they think that, well, if they're asking those questions, what are his crimes, that maybe that person will start to think, oh, he must have crimes or something like that. So it's partly an effort to discredit us with friends and relatives, but it doesn't work.
Yeah, I'm finding it to be very layered. Even I'll tell you what, they're attacking. They're even attacking social media, just people in general. Like not just individuals. They're attacking just anyone who speaks out. And I'm wondering how far until they realize they can't fair game everybody. they can't get everybody.
Yeah. Well, they don't actually fair game everybody. I mean, they try to, but they just don't have the manpower to do everybody that's speaking out nowadays. I know that there are people who've spoken out who have not been fair gamed or have anybody come after them. Depends on how much they get into the spotlight, and how close they come.
Well, I think there's a difference too. I think there's levels. Like when I say people that support my show and myself have been fair gamed, it's more just petty social media agitation, and it's not the same level as, say, a Paulette Cooper or an Amy Scobie would get, or maybe yourself even have been, fair gamed.
Oh yeah, we've been followed by private investigators, and proved to be private investigators. So they've come, and they have one of their top attorneys write us a cease and desist letter once. Nothing came of it. I mean, they threatened legal action if we didn't stop doing what we're doing and stuff. But, right now our view is we're fighting for our kids. We love our kids, and there's nothing they can do that's going to compare to that. Anything that we feel that is putting us in any kind of danger with the church, it just doesn't matter to us because, our kids are that important to us.
Yeah, that's commendable. I mean, the time you spent away from your kids, has there been any opportunity, any at all, to sneak in a word or get any kind of communication with them?
Well, not really. We had 2 phone calls some time ago. I mean, originally we had a phone call from our son when we had the LAPD kind of go. We were kind of desperate. This was about a year ago, maybe a little more. We had the LAPD. We asked them to do a welfare check on our son because he does have a physical problem. And I know in Scientology they don't believe in medical care. So, we were getting kind of worried. So anyway, we had them go in, and it was a bit of a thing because first of all, they wouldn't even let the police see him, and then they finally said, well, he's not on the property, so they gave them an address, and they went to the address, and the church had given the police a false address. So police got mad. They tracked him down. They got a hold of him, but he had some handlers, some Scientology security handlers with him. So when the police gave him a phone and said, "Here's, call your dad," and when he called, it was just not a pretty call. So, and then we did have a call from our daughter when we were going to set up the Clearwater billboard. We were on our way to Florida, and she called, and it was a call that was forced. Scientology forced her to make this call and give us an ultimatum. Said, look, if you want a relationship with your kids, then you have to stop criticizing Scientology. You have to stop the billboard from going up and back out of doing the TV show that we were doing. And I said, I'll do all three of those things. I will do every one of those right now if you do one thing for me, and that is shut down disconnection for all the thousands of families that have been separated by Scientology. And she couldn't do it. I mean, I could just hear the background. And then it sort of, she kind of started a little bit hotter about it. I guess as she was being pushed to say, no, this is just about us and whatnot. And then halfway through a sentence of hers, the phone cut out. So I'm sure that the Scientologists that were handling her there, they just realized it wasn't going anywhere and hung up. But so neither of the calls were anywhere we could get anything in. But at this point, as much as we love our kids, it's not about us anymore. I couldn't, like when I had that phone call with her, I couldn't just say yes to seeing the kids and then leave out all these other people. We've met many of these families that have been forced to disconnect by Scientology, and there's the nicest people you ever want to meet. And
yep.
I would never be able to face them again if I just dropped this thing and just said, okay, well, we got our kids back, tough on you kind of thing.
It's interesting because I said that before. My first ex-Scientologist I ever had in the show is Kathy Schenkelberg. And, she didn't have quite the experience a lot of you guys had. She got out with her family intact and took minimum abuse, I think, in comparison. But she, she did her part, and we had a great conversation at the end. In my little, wrap-up of the show, and this is like, at this point, I don't know a whole lot about the inner workings of Scientology. I didn't know what Kathy's told me and what's in Going Clear. And I made a statement, shame on our government officials, that allowed this to happen, because I feel like you guys have been kind of deserted by law enforcement and lawmakers in this respect. And shame on them, because they do that. It's kind of a selfish thing that it's too much trouble, too much red tape. You guys don't even have to say.
Well, it's a good point you make, because if you look at it, that Scientology hides behind their, religious status, their First Amendment, and they're always being protected. In the courts, it seems they tend to win a lot, but the victims of their abuse don't get the same protection. So it is unbalanced. It's definitely unbalanced. They always hide behind they're the victim of apparent bigots, but the victims of their abuse and the abuse that they commit is just legion. I mean, there's just so many stories of abuse. And whenever you hear anybody who gets out of the C organization, the Scientology C organization, you never hear them say, I left. They always say, I escaped. So, it's a terrible situation to have in this country.
Well, we talk about, you said that, you kind of said it there was, you guys couldn't turn your back on everybody else that's been through it. And, our government officials and police again, or, I'm not saying go out and take action against police and government officials or anything. I'm just saying, they turn a blind eye the way that John Travolta would. If you say, what do you think of all these abuses? They talk about, oh, I never seen it, never heard of it, I don't want to hear it. It's a blind eye. But what I will say is, I can't believe what you're doing. It's amazing. You've been doing the GoFundMe's for this, and I see that you have a billboard in Clearwater right now, currently up.
No, we did have the billboard in Clearwater for a short time. They're fairly expensive, so we can't keep them up for too long. And you can only ask people for money for so much. You don't want to sort of drain people, but it gets the statement out there. And then every once in a while we'll put a new billboard up. Like I said, this is our third one. It's always the same message. We always have the same billboard. To my loved one in Scientology, call me. And we have a link to our website on there, which is stopscientologydisconnection.com.
So let me ask you this. Has anyone ever responded to that?
Yes, as a matter of fact. I can't tell the names because they wanted to sort of stay quiet, but there were two. One specifically that said it was because of the billboard that they were able to get their,
nice.
family member out. I mean, it's not a lot in the scheme of things, but the other thing is that we also have different posters and we have magnetic signs for the car, and we've driven around their buildings with the signs, and every time we do that, because the website address is on there, we notice that the traffic on the website goes up. So
nice.
The public and the staff, probably not the staff so much because they don't have access to the internet, but definitely a lot of the public have been looking. And now they're trained to not look. There was one of our friends who was down there protesting once. There was a group of maybe a dozen Scientologists down around the big blue building in Los Angeles, and he came up with a sign, and in unison they all turned around. It was like a military exercise. They all turned their backs so they couldn't look. And then we were down there a few weeks ago and driving around the building with one of the magnetic signs on our car, and there was one of the Sea Org girls there, puts her hand up to block her eyes so she wouldn't be able to see the sign. And all the sign said was the same thing to my loved one, the Scientology called me. I got that on video, and I actually had Tony Ortega. I think it was on Tony. We put it on Tony Ortega.
Oh, my God.
That she actually wouldn't look at the sign. I mean, it was just bizarre.
That is the most bizarre. Because you know what? They had to show them the sign to say, if you see this, look at what
I know. It's just crazy. It's like, what's going to happen? So, are their beliefs so fragile that they can't even look at a sign like that?
It's like opening up the ark. It's like, don't close your eyes.
Yeah, it's just bizarre. It is. It's like their beliefs are, well, and they are beliefs. I mean, really, they a lot of, in Scientology, they say it's scientific, this and that, but it's not. I mean, it's really a set of beliefs because you have to believe that eventually you're going to achieve the clear OT. But we were in for 40 years, my wife and I, and we never saw a clear or an OT, and that's really kind of to a large degree what got us out, is that we finally woke up and said, you know what? We've been fighting for 40 years for this clear and OT thing, and in all that time we've never seen one clear or OT. And, they say that there's clears, but per the definition in the book and whatnot, and the definition of an OT, never seen one.
That amuses me to a degree, and I try not to laugh too much at it because that's not a good way to approach it, but there's some amusement to it, to the effect that in Tony Ortega's book, The Unbreakable Miss Lovely, if you remember, one of the first things Paulette Cooper did to experience Scientology was a friend that said he believed he was the second coming of Jesus Christ, which that's not even a Scientology thing. he was just that touched by it.
It is, if you start to really look at it, and when you're in it, you don't. You kind of do these little mental things where you won't look at negative things. I mean, the training is unbelievable, the mental conditioning in Scientology, too. And that's partly what keeps you in. It's not always they're saying not to look. They're saying they train you to not look, to not think, to not question. But when you start to look at it, once you get out, it is crazy. I mean, if you look at what their OT levels are about, where they have like these body thetans attached to the body. I don't know if you know the soul story of Xenu.
Oh yeah.
So in the auditing, you're dealing with these. You have to communicate to these beings in order to get them to leave your body. And I say to people, I say, well, if you see a guy walking down the street talking to somebody who's not there, you think he's a crazy person. But Scientology, that for year after year after year, they have people sitting in a chair holding on to cans on a meter, talking to somebody who isn't there. And, they can make people crazy by that. And I've seen people who have gone through years and years of auditing, and it does make many of them crazy to a degree. So, I've seen Scientology not only not help, but I've seen it make people worse by doing it.
Yeah, we're going to talk more about that probably when I have you back. We talked about this. I want to have you back on to be more detailed about it. We're doing a brief thing here to promote the signs, and we talked a good amount already about some stuff, which I really appreciate, Phil. You brought a lot to the table here. But do you think there's somebody waiting by the phone, just waiting for the last day of your lease on that sign to call and get that changed?
Oh, well, that happened in Clearwater. When the day our contract was up, Scientology put up their own billboard right on that spot.
Yeah, I was reading that article. That's why I asked you. I was like, they had to have been waiting. It's so funny because I'll tell you, when Chris Shelton was on Scientology The Aftermath with Lair Remini and Mike Rinder, the first thing I did as soon as I saw his face, I went to GoDaddy and I looked up the domain of who is Chris Shelton because I wanted to buy it and block it, and it was already gone.
Yeah. Well, Scientology owns for us who is Phil Jones, who is Billy Jones.
Yeah.
They own a bunch of domains in our name, but yeah, I don't care. They're going to put up a hate site on us at some point, I'm sure. But the thing is, what I did when I saw that they had bought those domains, they've also bought every single domain you could think of, thousands of domains with David Miscavige's name in it. So it's almost impossible to find something under David Miscavige's name that's not available. But I got lucky and I found the best domain and I registered it. And I said, look, if they put up a hate site on us, I'm going to put a satire site up on David Miscavige. And the website I got was davidmiscavigehates.us. Hates us. David Miscavige hates us.
I like that.
And I'm just going to, I've got a bunch of people ready to go for, do a big satire site on David Miscavige. If they put something up on us, we'll just put something up on him. But, even then, what are they going to put up? They have to make stuff up on us. I don't know what they would put up. My wife and I are like senior citizens that are like, we're not outgoing at all. I mean, the fact that we've done the billboards and that, this is such a step out for us to do this kind of thing because we're just not outgoing kind of people to do that kind of thing. And they make stuff up. If they can't find anything, they make it up. So
they do. I don't know if you know this, but I'm hateful and I incite violence.
Oh man. Just talking to you, I just feel like smashing my fist on the table.
I'm so frustrating. I know.
Oh man. Oh.
Well,
I know. It's amazing what they can. It's just. Yeah, they get sort of, and they really scrape it to try to make up stuff on people. It's just getting old. The stuff they say, it's always the same crap. Oh, he's in it for the money. Oh, he's in it for the, this or in it for that. But it's all just lie.
Oh man, I'm definitely.
Scientology. You can't believe anything Scientology says. Anyway, they have a drill, a training routine called TRL, Training Routine Lie, where they actually have people where they'll sit you down, you sit down with another person, and you practice lying until you can lie comfortably, easily, and believably. And that's a training routine in Scientology that they train their public relations people on. So anything that Scientology says, pretty much. I mean, lying is part of the culture.
Well, you can line up a half a dozen people's disconnected children videos against them, and they basically sound the same. So right. It's a loose script, and it's there. And well, I hope people come out to this dedication because you're flying out to it. You're based out of somewhere other than California.
Well, we're in Las Vegas. We'll be driving out. We go back and forth.
Oh, okay.
So we'll be heading out there shortly, and they may be there. Scientology probably had, when we were at the one in Clearwater, they had people planted. There was a guy sitting on the bus stop across the street all day long. I mean, just sitting there with a camera pointed at us. There was a guy across the street further down sitting on top of a trailer with a camera with a lens that had to have been 2 feet long. And then they had little hidden cameras like all around, just like right close down to where the billboard was, pointing at us. We found all the cameras and just turned them away. And then we had one of our guys put a camera
on them.
just to see when they came to pick up their cameras, and so we got that on film, which is kind of cool.
They don't even try to hide it. What is that? Cause,
no, that's true. They weren't hiding that well. They were trying to hide somewhat. Like the guy on the top of the trailer was sort of kind of behind bushes, and the guy in the bus station or the bus stop was sort of like just trying to look like he was just reading a newspaper sitting there, but then his hand down farther had a little camera pointed out. I mean, and these little cameras they had hidden were only about 2 inches long, little black, little rectangular camera things. Unless you knew what to look for, you wouldn't have seen them. They were hidden all around the place.
Well, I mean more like the detectives, because like you saw the guy on the bench holding the phone up, looking at you with it. I've seen that on Larry Remedy's show too, with the two guys in the hotel. Yeah. They're just pointing it right at you. There's no hiding it. Are they not worried? They just don't care if you see them?
Part of it is an intimidation thing. I mean, they do it to go, hey, we're watching.
Oh, they want you to see it.
In some cases, yeah, they do. So they do. There's two different types. They'll do sort of hidden investigations, and they do what they call loud investigations, where they just want to intimidate you.
It's amazing that this can exist. We touched on it earlier, and I tweeted about it yesterday when Tony Ortega put out about that judgment yesterday in favor of Scientology, and it's just so frustrating because I feel like, and I say this a lot, and really it just falls on deaf ears because they'll always point to the Constitution. The freedom of religion it shouldn't be a golden ticket. None of our freedoms should be a golden ticket to be criminals.
Right, because the victims of their abuses don't have the same freedoms.
Yeah, I mean, well, that's just it, though. We don't have laws so they can be abused. We have laws so they can be enforced. Right. And there should be a difference there as far as law enforcement is concerned in government.
Yeah.
All right, well,
eventually, I think all this stuff will catch up to Scientology. They have enough crimes and abuses and, breaking up so many families. It will catch up to them.
Well, I hope you have a good turnout there. I hope you guys have a great time. I wish I could go, but it's on the other side of the country for me. I'm close to the Clearwater. But I really wish you the best with this, and I definitely I'm going to have you back on in a few weeks here. We're going to go ahead and we'll finish this discussion and have a little bit more detailed talk about your experiences.
Sounds great. Thank you very much, Chris. I appreciate you having me on.
No problem, Phil. You take care. We'll be in touch.
All right. Thanks.
No problem.
All right, so that was Phil Jones. That billboard dedication is at 4301 Sunset Boulevard, Los Angeles again. It'll be at 10:30 a.m. tomorrow. Turn up if you can. And I think I know some people trained in that TRL. Let's see here. Now it's time for part 2 of Tony Ortega. I think you enjoy it. Stay on the line for a preview of next week's podcast. And next week's podcast, I think I meant to say. And would also be covered as far as the anti-Scientology cult. Here it is.
You hadn't at this point even met Paulette Cooper yet, is that right?
I hadn't met her, but I had. One of the things that was interesting to me was that when I first started writing about Scientology in Phoenix and then Los Angeles in the 90s, somewhere along there, I would get emails from people encouraging me, saying, "I'm glad you're looking into this." I used to get emails from Ida Camber, sweet lady in Inland Empire. Really loved her. She would always send me these emails about, "You did a great job, keep it up." And then I got a couple emails like that, basically just encouraging me and saying she liked my stories by somebody who called herself Paulette. And I thought, now this can't be the Paulette, but it turned out it was. And Paulette Cooper was reaching out across the country to send me an email to say attaboy, basically. And I thought that was really great. And we traded a few emails. And then nothing came from that. I didn't see how I could write a story about her at that point. But then in New York, in fact, it was right around the time the Squirrel Busters were happening. I heard from some people that had been sort of talking to Paulette about some things, and she was upset that Tom Cruise was about to get a Humanitarian of the Year award from the Simon Wiesenthal Center. And these people that knew her approached me and said, "Would you be interested in a statement from Paulette Cooper about that?" I said, of course. And so that's how we kind of reconnected. I printed her statement, which was, probably the most read thing I'd ever put up about Scientology up to that point. And then I reached out to her and said, I don't know if you remember me. And she said, sure. And so we started talking. And then by a year later, I had done a few stories about what she had been through, about how she survived the Holocaust. And I realized the more I dug into her story, the more there was there. And that's when, you're really happy as a writer when you realize that it was great because it was a situation where everybody thought they knew her story, that here was this woman, Paulette Cooper, that had written one of the first books about Scientology, and then they harassed her like nobody else. She was like the best example of fair game, and they'd gotten her indicted and all this stuff for a crime she didn't commit. Everybody thought they knew that story, but the more I dug into it, the more I realized it was a mess online. And there was just so much more than people realized. And that's when I pitched to her the idea. I said, look, I'd really like to do something larger here as a project. And so we decided that we'd do that book. And so, I spent the next couple of years interviewing her and other people that knew her that went through the whole thing. And that's how my book came about.
The great thing.
First time we actually met then was December 2011. She came up to New York to visit her sister, and we had breakfast. And that was the first time we met.
The greatest thing about this whole thing is I don't want to give away the book because it's a business thing too, selling books. But man, this book, I see a lot of people ask you and Mike Rinder and others if they thought that under David Miscavige that maybe Scientology is much more ruthless than it would have been if it was still L. Ron Hubbard running it. And I think your book, they hadn't read your book yet, and your book really, I think, definitively answers that. It's just incredible, everything about it. And I'll tell you what, because I just finished it myself. The Paulette Cooper story, The Unbreakable Miss Lovely, is a book that is so much more than about fair game. So much more than about Scientology. It's people need to read it. You cover a lot.
Well, thanks. It was, like I said, we really worked hard. It's not Paulette's memoir. It's my history. Because I talk to people other than Paulette, and I think that's crucial. I think memoirs often are a little too, one person's point of view, and I don't think they're as useful as, when you dig in and interview people. And believe me, some of the people I talk to, like former spies that ran these operations against her, they still hate her guts. And that's why it's good to talk to them, because they're going to give you information that she's not going to. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And I think that worked out really well. I talked to a lot of different people, dug up a lot of records, some that I've never seen the light of day before. And then the best piece of advice I got was from my publisher, Humphrey Hunter. I had started to write some pages. I started sending them to him. He said, stop. You got to start over again. He said, don't write this like it's a newspaper story. You need to write it like it's happening. And that was the best advice I got. I started over again. And he was right. The one thing I needed to do is I couldn't just do what Janet Reitman and Larry Wright had already done. Right? Janet Reitman and Larry Wright both wrote fantastic histories of the Church of Scientology. They're massive. They cover a huge amount of material. They're telling the story of L. Ron Hubbard. They're telling the story of Dianetics. They're telling the story of the celebrities, all in one book. And I knew that who would want a book from me doing the same thing. I had to find something different. And I realized that Paulette's story, if I focused on it more as a narrative about what she had been through, what she saw, how she was harassed, they sued her 19 times. They ran multiple operations against her, some of which people have never heard of before. And then to tell it as if, it's like a novel and it's unfolding. That was a great decision by my publisher, and I think it added a lot to why people enjoy the book.
Oh, absolutely. I will say this, that it seems like she went through alone just against her, combined with everybody else since then has been through fair game-wise. Like, she's...
There are definitely some other people that have been harassed really badly. I mean, one of them's definitely Mike Rinder. I mean, he's a constant source of harassment, target of harassment. And there have been some others as well, but something about Paulette really enraged L. Ron Hubbard, and he wanted her destroyed. And so they kept throwing multiple operations after her. And anybody else probably would have said, enough, I can't, leave me alone, I don't want to have anything to do with you. But she kept going on TV. She kept talking to other reporters. She kept going on the radio. She really felt that this was something that needed to be exposed, and she never backed down. So, and then if you meet her today, I mean, she's just such a kick in the pants. She's wonderful. She's hilarious. That's part of why I really wanted to do the book is I really admire her. At the same time, if you read my book, she made some not so great decisions.
Right.
And I thought it was important that those are in there. This is, because she was struggling at times, and she kind of walked into their traps.
Yeah.
But she survived it all, and she's really great.
Yeah, I have a lot of respect for that lady. I would like to meet her. But I can tell you, anyone who reads it's going to want to meet her, and she is an inspiration, really, for anyone going through anything. That she could have the backbone she had and stand up to that. One of the things about that, too, that really sticks with me, if you want to look at it from a philosophical standpoint, kind of, while Scientology's, doing disconnection, the Paulette Cooper story, really, the way you round that book out, and I won't give it all away, but she's kind of got a story of connection, of reconnection. And I think that's a valuable point that I don't know if you meant it to be that way, but it really it's a narrative in there that can be found.
Well, you talk about families getting ripped apart by Scientology. I mean, that's something that, the opposite example is Paulette. I mean, how close she was to her parents. Her dad almost lived to 100, and in his last few years, they were living basically in buildings next to each other, and they had breakfast every day. That kind of family connection was super important to her, and she just was really offended that one of the things Scientology does is separate parents from children. So yeah, she is a counterexample in that way, and she's a truth teller, and Scientology is, has a real problem with telling the truth. There's a lot of ways in which she's, about as opposite as you can get from Scientology.
No, I'm told at times I do have people patting me on the back as well, saying, thank you for doing this, and they say, you seem very well informed. And the funny thing is I'm still learning, because I read these articles here and there over the years, but I haven't really studied it as much as anyone like yourself would have. And now I'm starting to want to know more, and I learn, like I said, I learn every day things, and I'm just more informed than the average person is all it is. Is there stuff that still surprises you? Are you still learning a little bit sometimes, even though you've been covered?
I'm absolutely still learning. One of the things that's great about the Underground Bunker are the people in the comments. There are people in the comments that know far more about Scientology than I do. These are people that, these are people that were in Scientology 30 years. You think I'm going to tell them anything about Scientology they don't know?
Nope.
I always keep that in mind, right? I'm a reporter covering a moving story. I'm not an expert who's just telling people, what I've learned. That's not me. I'm a reporter. I'm covering a story, and often when people ask me a question, I give them a link. Here, go read this story. You know what I'm saying is I'm trying to build up this library of stories of things that we've covered, but no, I'm always learning, and like I said, those mysteries I'm still trying to solve. There's still, people talk about, well, nobody knows this, nobody knows that. Well, I want to find out. Who do I talk to? Who can I interview? So, for example, I hinted that I've got a story coming down the road about a death, and I happened the other day to be reading about a different story about it, and saw a name, and realized, hey, wait a minute, I know how to get a hold of that person. And so I talked to that person, and it was the first time this person's been interviewed about it by any reporter in 40 years.
Wow.
And all of a sudden I have this information that nobody's printed. Now I can't release that yet because there's a second person I want to talk to who was also there. See, I want to cross confirm. I want to get everything down,
right? And
then hopefully I can release that pretty soon. But that's what just keeps me going. Is I've got this file of lists of just potential stories of people I haven't interviewed yet, or people I need to interview more. And every day I just look down that list and I say, okay, what can I do today? Who can I call? What document can I read? And it's a great list. I mean, there are wonderful stories from the 70s, from the 80s, from the 90s, from just last week. I just feel like this is still such a fertile field for any investigator. Just yesterday, some novelist I never heard of wrote a really good story looking at putting L. Ron Hubbard's fiction in context. And he's not the first person to do that, but he did such a good job of it. I mean, there's so many more things that we can do to understand Hubbard and how he came up with Dianetics and how it grew and how did it survive the FBI raid of 1977? You know, how did it survive 11 top officials being put in prison?
I wonder.
You know, it's really fascinating.
I do wonder about that. I mean, it's so strange to me that this happened in really not too long after the fallout of that. All right, you can have your tax exemption. That's fine. You know, is there a theory? I know you guys have a theory of it on the website. That when, and I think this is pretty well known, when files were stolen from the IRS, do you think there was something in there that the IRS doesn't want people to know, or do you think it was something more that IRS doesn't want it to be a publicly known thing, that they were so easily infiltrated? You think there was some kind of influence that way in giving them their tax exemption?
You know, it's I talk about it some in my book about how you're talking about the Snow White program between 1974 and 1977. Scientology had these operatives who had either been placed as employees at places like the Justice Department and the IRS, or they just had these spies that were just breaking in and walking out with documents by the yard. And it went on just very, you know, they had very little trouble doing it. And then finally in 76, two of them were stopped by police, and stopped by a librarian who called the FBI, and two FBI agents showed up to talk to these guys. Well, it turns out that of those two FBI agents, one of them was a woman named Christine Hansen, and she was one of the first women FBI agents in history. And that intrigued me, and I called her up, and she, when I was researching the book, and once again I said, "So have other reporters asked you about this?" And she said, "No, nobody's ever called me."
Wow.
I was stunned. This is the woman who helped unravel Snow White. What she did was, so these two guys had been rooting around in a U.S. attorney's office after hours, and they had been caught. And they had kind of some lame excuses, and the FBI couldn't arrest them at that point, but they asked them for some ID cards, and it turned out to all be fake. So she went back to the FBI office, and they're talking about it, and they're like, "Okay, why are these guys? What are they doing? You know, are they stealing something? Who are they? Why would they give fake IDs?" And at that point, I think it might have easily just been dropped. But she decided she was curious. What are these guys doing? And so she went down to the IRS office, and she was asking somebody, "How do you make a fake IRS ID if you had access to their equipment?" And so she was learning that. She turned around, and here's one of those two guys walking down the hall. Total accident.
Wow.
Right? She walks up to him and said, "You're under arrest." And that's how Gerald Wolfe was arrested in, I believe it was June 1976. Well, that sent Scientology into an uproar, because now one of their spies has been arrested, but they don't know if the FBI knows whether they're working for Scientology or not. And they didn't at first. And Mary Sue Hubbard, who was running this whole thing, was like, "Look, they're not going to figure that out, but we need to clamp things down." So they got the other spy back to California. His name was Michael Meisner. They gave him a different appearance, right? They dyed his hair. They hid him in an apartment. And they tried to figure out, okay, now what are we going to do? As long as they don't know it was Scientology, we're cool. Well, what Mary Sue Hubbard didn't realize was Christine Hansen was really smart. And she figured out pretty early on that it was Scientology. And she started researching, well, why would Scientology be breaking into government offices? Ultimately, so that's why Michael Meisner ultimately ran away from his captors in Scientology, turned himself over to the FBI in June '77, and 3 weeks later, on July 8, 1977, the FBI raided the Church of Scientology after he had told them what they were really doing, that they were breaking into all these offices, they were stealing documents, they were trying to foil all of the government actions against Hubbard, basically. And once he had told them where they were stealing these documents from, where they were storing them, that's when the FBI raided. And none of it would have happened if Christine Hansen had not been curious about who are these guys and why would they be giving out fake IDs. So I wanted her to make sure she got credit for that in my book.
Definitely.
And it's just one of those great parts of Scientology history that, but they ended up, Mary Sue Hubbard went to prison, and 10 other top officials went to prison over that.
Right. Do you think there's something in those documents that caused them not to, the IRS not to give them any more trouble? Or?
So at that point in '77, they did not have tax exempt status. They had lost tax exempt status in '67. Okay, but Hubbard just didn't pay taxes. He didn't care. They took away tax exempt status in '67, but they just didn't pay. So in '77, they sent all these officials to prison, but they still didn't. They didn't give them tax exempt status. What happened was, as the years went on, that unpaid tax bill got bigger and bigger and bigger. By the time Hubbard died in '86, it was getting really large. As Marty Rathbun has explained, by the early '90s, it was up to $1 billion with a B that they owed the IRS, and they didn't even have that much money. So, Marty makes the point that they were facing, ruin if they didn't get tax exempt status, because they're not going to be able to pay that bill. So they had just put the IRS under incredible pressure for years. They didn't, they actually put individual IRS employees under harassment. And real petty stuff too. Like the New York Times has a great story from that era talking about how they made individual IRS agents, made their lives miserable with all these petty little complaints and harassment techniques. Until finally in October '91, David Miscavige and Marty Rathbun just showed up at the IRS office in D.C. and were allowed to see the IRS commissioner at the time, Fred Goldberg, under George Bush the First. And Marty has described this several times that basically, they told him, why can't we come to an agreement of some kind? At that point they had 2,400 lawsuits going against the IRS. And they told him that all those lawsuits will go away, all the harassment will go away, if we could just find some sort of agreement. And Marty said that as they were leaving the room, Goldberg pulled him aside and said, is he telling the truth? Will this all go away? And Marty said, yeah, it will. And he said Goldberg's shoulders visibly, relaxed. Okay, this will all be over. And then right after that is when Fred Goldberg announced that they were doing a study. Now, I've talked to tax experts, tax journalism experts, who tell me that once Goldberg made that decision, that study took 3 more years, or two more years, but once he made that decision, it was a done deal. They were going to get tax exempt status. And they had to turn over a lot of documents and jump through a lot of hoops. But October '93, they gave them basically everything. I mean, they gave them all tax exempt status for virtually all their entities. And that $1 billion tax bill tore it up. They had to pay $9 million, which is a joke, right?
Right.
So that's how that happened, was just pure harassment. Pure harassment of the IRS day and night. The IRS caved, which is kind of incredible because, we think of the IRS as being this bully and this real powerful force, but Scientology brought it to its knees.
Wow, I think I did that to my parents when I was 6 so I can go out and play. That's craziness. Are you familiar with the Jeff Warren's thing, the polygamist, the whole breakup of that group?
I lived in Arizona for several years, so I was very aware of the polygamists that live on the border between Utah and Arizona. But I don't know more about it than typical people who watch TV and see it.
Okay. I don't want to ask you more than what you knew about it, because I know facts are important. I'm just wondering if you maybe speculatively you could say what you think the difference is. Why can the polygamist group be broken up and Scientology's protected or or can't be broken up?
Well, there have historically been problems with raiding a polygamous location. I mean, wasn't there one in Texas where they got reports that there were no. It was a fundamentalist Mormon thing, and there was somebody called in an anonymous tips about kids being in danger, so the authorities raided the compound and took all these kids out, and then it turned into a legal nightmare for the government. I think they're wary of that. It took a lot of time, a lot of reporting about what was going on in the Warren Jeffs group before they finally took action. Why does the government go after one group but not another? Well, the fundamentalist Mormon polygamists, how big is that group? And how big of an area do they cover, right?
Right.
Scientology's also not a big group. It's, people, they claim to have millions. They've probably only got 20,000 around the whole world, but they're around the whole world, and they have some famous people, and they have a lot of money they're willing to spend on attorneys. So that makes things a little more difficult for law enforcement. The other big problem for law enforcement is, we hear a story about, children being abused and misused. And, take, for example, Laura DiCrescenzo, who at 12 years old was working 90 hours a week and was punished because she admitted missing her mother. Now, you would think that is so outrageous that let's send the FBI down there tomorrow. The problem is none of us learned about that until Laura was in her mid-30s. So 20 years after the fact. And that's all. Usually the problem with Scientology is that by the time we hear about a specific case of abuse, so much time has passed, law enforcement will tell you we can't do anything about it. So it's difficult to get information about what's happening right now. And there are other, the other problem is, the FBI came very close to raiding the international base near Hemet in the summer of 2010. They came very, very close. They came so close to raiding the base that, I talked to some of the people who were their informants, ex-Scientologists. One of them told me that the FBI had asked him to ride in the van with them as they went into the base so he could help identify people for them. And he had said yes, he was ready to go. Another informant found that they had recorded the tail numbers on Tom Cruise's airplane in his Burbank hangar,
right,
in case Miscavige tried to run that way. That's how close they came to raiding the base that summer. And then they changed their mind. Their why is very complex. I have a story about that.
Right, I've seen that, yeah.
I mean, Lawrence Wright and the Tampa Bay Times guys tend to blame the Headley's lawsuit, but I think it's more complex than that. But anyway, it's a long story.
Well, it is difficult. It appears it's difficult for a one-on-one for an individual to have something happen like the Headley's case and and some of the other cases. But if you take them one-on-one, you're going to get overwhelmed. You're going to get tied up in court. You're going to lose or settle out of court, basically. And it feels like these settling out of court type of things are what's hurting progress. Like every time you get close to putting them away, like we think that might have been something behind the scenes with the rathbuns. That's hurting the overall picture because these people, and maybe in some cases, absolutely, they deserve to be able to walk away from it and not be bothered by it anymore, and they just want to end it. But it feels like the bigger picture should be, I don't know law very well, Tony, but it seems like we should be able to get a bunch of people together who've had past cases or past experiences and show a pattern and possibly go at it from that standpoint.
I think there are a number of different things you could do. I mean, when Mike Rinder and I were talking about the possible raid on the base in 2010, he said it was a bad idea. He said, you go in there and say to these people in the hole, hey, you can come out now, you're free. And they might say, no, we're not being held.
Yeah.
That's a nightmare for law enforcement. If he was saying you could, he said, Mike Rinder said to me, why don't they build an obstruction of justice case instead? And I think something like that might be more likely where, I personally know about some examples of abuse where it's not just that somebody was held against their will or somebody was physically abused. But it's that they were then put under so much pressure not to talk about it, not to, and it's that cover-up that I think might be something that law enforcement should be able to establish. So we'll see. I think something like that might happen.
What do you? Is that what you think is the end game? Do you think that's when it finally ends for Scientology? When that's the trigger's pulled on that kind of operation?
I think there's a number of different things that could happen. I don't, Scientology was forcing young women to have abortions for decades. But once that came out, they stopped doing that. They were sensitive to the fact that the press was starting to talk about that in 2010. And so now if a young woman in the Sea Org gets pregnant, they just get kicked out. When the whole was this, they always have had this prison program for Sea Org members called the RPF, the Rehabilitation Project Force. But then Miscavige established this prison just for his executives at the base near Hemet called the Hole, and that started in January 2004. But by 2009, when the Tampa Bay Times really revealed what was going on there, again, that press pressure convinced Miscavige to change that. And so I think there are still a segregated population of people at its base that are referred to as the Hole, but they're not kept in that prison-like environment anymore. In fact, even tore down that building.
Interesting.
Miscavige has ameliorated some of these things when press exposure, brought it to the public's attention. But I'm still convinced that young people are working insane hours for no pay, that families are being ripped apart, that physical conditions for some of these people who are probably being forced to clean the engine rooms of the free winds, all of that's still going on. And there are any number of ways that law enforcement can get interested in that, or the IRS can get interested in re-examining the tax-exempt status. I think you have, from what I can tell, I think there are law enforcement agencies that are interested in looking at these things and possibly taking action. I think the IRS is interested. It really comes down to how much pressure there is and how much people really want this to happen. But at the same time, the person doing the most damage to the Church of Scientology is David Miscavige. This thing is shrinking. People are being driven away by his mania for fundraising. And I think, Mike Rinder once said that, listen, if you're an official at the IRS or FBI or anywhere, and you're thinking about taking on the Church of Scientology, you basically have to decide if that's worth spending the rest of your career on, because you will, right? You'll be fighting their attorneys for years and years and years. And so let's say you're an upper-level guy at the IRS, and you're watching this, and you're thinking, okay, we could spend the next 4 or 5 years trying to take their tax-exempt status, but if you look at what Miscavige is doing to Scientology, it may not even exist in 4 or 5 years. Who knows? They're driving so many people away now. So I think everyone's kind of waiting to see who's going to make the first step. And I don't, David Miscavige is the Church of Scientology at this point. He owns the copyrights and the trademarks and the bank accounts. He really doesn't have to have members of the Church of Scientology. But he's still trying to put on this show by opening these buildings around the world and putting out these press releases, trying to convince the outside world that Scientology is actually expanding when it's actually shrinking.
That reminds me. It kind of amuses me. I did a gag on that on this show because I know you put an article out where you had the audio from the year-end gala, the David Miscavige's speech. One of the things about that is, we talk about how he makes up the astronomical numbers, says whatever sounds good, gives credit to news stories that are something else that turned out to be another thing. And maybe you can speak to this. Something that stood out to me, because I remember when this happened, I think most of us do in the news, with all the police shootings of unarmed black men and the Black Lives Matter movement. There was a point where the Crips and the Bloods actually laid down their guns and stood together against violence. And I don't think Scientology had anything to do with that, but David Miscavige sure made it sound like they did.
Well, they had, there was gang summits happen all the time. So I think this was an unusual one because the rapper of the game showed up. And that, of course, made it a much bigger deal. And it was held at the Scientology Community Center in Inglewood. And there were people like Alfred Johnson and some other Scientology officials were there. So yeah, I mean, David Miscavige is bragging about that. I don't blame him. I mean, it was an encouraging sign to see these people get together and talk. But Scientology never does something like that without its own interest in mind, right? And
right.
They're using that now as propaganda. Yes, it was a good event. I'm glad they did that. It's good that the game showed up, but I don't think they should forget that Scientology has its own interest in mind.
Yeah, but did Scientology arrange that, or it just happened to happen at that center? Because a lot of times you don't even know you're at a Scientology center.
I have a feeling Alfredi set that up, but I'm not sure.
Okay. All right, very good. So you do this thing every year called HowdyCon.
Yeah, you should come to it.
I'm thinking about it.
I'll give you a quick background on that. My book came out in May 2015, and I then decided to go around on a book tour, and I went to various American cities. I even went to Australia and Europe. And at some point, somebody in the comments at my website said, "Tony, why are you going to so many places?" Which I thought, would be kind of obvious. I mean, it's fun, But I jokingly said, I can't. I got to see all these different places before I pick a place for us to have a convention. And I was just joking, right? But the commenters went wild with it. They were like, "Yes, we're going to have a convention. Let's figure out where." And they actually had a vote. So I had nothing to do with this. The readers organized it. They organized a vote, and they picked Cleveland, Ohio, of all places, because I think we have a particularly strong group of readers in that general area of Missouri, Ohio, that kind of thing. And so we set it up, and it was last year. Our timing was amazing. We happened to be there just as the Cavaliers were winning the NBA championship, and we were out in the streets with all the people celebrating. But it was just 50 of us, and we were just there to have fun, and we went to the Rock and Roll Museum together, and we had a special dinner, and Chris Shelton was there, and Pete Griffiths from Ireland was there, and our guest of honor was Professor David Turetsky from Carnegie Mellon University, who flew his private plane from Pittsburgh up to Cleveland to join us. And it was a total success. I mean, that's all it was. We didn't have any, it wasn't one of these formal things with papers and panels or anything like that. It was just people that have a similar interest getting together and having fun. So at the end of it, to make sure that they didn't get any thoughts of doing any more voting, I said next year we'll have it in Denver. And so we've been planning on that. HowdyCon this year will be in Denver from June 23rd to 25th. And there's details on the website. And where the name comes from is that when we were first organizing the first one, I just wanted to have a funny name that didn't name after me or anything. So there was a beloved commenter, Steve Cox, who went by the screen name Captain Howdy, and he passed away. And I wrote about him, and people still miss him a great deal. And then so I just decided to call it HowdyCon, and I thought that was funny, and people love it. So. And our first one was dedicated to him, and also to Mary Marinelli, was another wonderful commenter that we lost, and she went by the name Sugar Plum Fairy, which is just an indication that we have this wonderful community there. People really get to know each other, and there's some fights and some name calling, but it's a much more, I think, intelligent and thoughtful space on the internet than you find in most places.
Yeah, I mean, do you have a lot of non-ex-Scientologists that appear there?
We have everybody. We have a lot of people that were never in Scientology that were just curious, that are curious about it. We have people that were in Scientology. We have some real experts, people that not only were longtime Scientologists but were real experts on the tech. So if I have a question, I'll just throw it out there, and one of them will have the answer. So Sonny Pereira, for example, is often helping us out with specific, Scientology jargon and history, and other people that go by various handles are there. That and then somebody like Mike Rinder will drop by, or Hannah Whitfield stops by on occasion. And it's really become kind of a community based around, okay, what's happening in Scientology today? What's the news? What's the latest? And so I get like 1,000 comments per story. I mean, it's really lively and a lot of fun.
Excellent. I'm going to think about it. I'm going to consider it. I have a lot of trips to make this year, it seems. But that's one I'm very interested in, especially since I've taken this up the way I have. I wanted to ask you one more question before I get into this. I don't know if I told you about it. I do something with every guest called 10 questions. Think fast. It's basically just 10 questions. Some are thought-provoking. Some are just ridiculous nonsense. If you're uncomfortable, you can pass. So I'm going to do that to end the interview. I can't remember the questions I'm going to ask you, so it'll come up later, I'm sure, when I don't need to ask you anymore.
Okay.
Before we do 10 questions, I was going to ask you, when we end the interview, I want you to stay on the line with me, though. I want to talk to you about something for 1 minute if I can, if you don't mind.
Sure.
Okay, cool.
Okay.
All right, I might edit that out. Okay, so now 10 questions with Tony Ortega. Tony, number 1, true or false? Deep down, Tom Cruise is a decent human being.
I think he's a kind of an asshole that gets a pass because he's a big star.
So false. Gotcha. All right, I'm with you. Number 2, the best thing you've ever done. So complete that statement. The best thing I've ever done is.
Oh, what's the best thing I've ever done is. I don't know, man. I think the best thing I've ever done is not join the Church of Scientology.
It's a great answer. Number 3, I love Clearwater. I visited every summer with my family, actually, believe it or not. So I know some people still live there that were part of Scientology and are ex-Scientologists, but I want to ask you, Clearwater at face value, take it or leave it?
Well, I'm a California guy, dude. I mean, I live in New York, but I'm from LA, and I don't know. I don't get Florida. I lived there for a while. I ran a newspaper there, but it's people. I mean, I lived in Fort Lauderdale for a while, and people were telling me, "Oh, this is paradise. This is paradise." I'm like, your sand at the beach has fleas.
I've never seen that. I've never seen the sand fleas.
I mean, it's this. I can't believe people call it paradise. I could go on and on about all the things about Florida I found utterly repellent. So when I'm in Clearwater and everybody's talking about how gorgeous and wonderful and beautiful it is, I'm just like, oh my God. Have you guys not been to California? Anyway. So no, I'm not. I feel for them that their downtown is decimated because of Scientology, but if there was no Scientology there, I'd probably never go there.
Gotcha, so leave it. All right, number 4. Here's a little bit of controversial one, maybe. More sincere, Christians or ex-Scientologists?
Oh, I can't answer that question. I mean, I've met very sincere Christians. I've met very sincere ex-Scientologists.
It's a terrible question. I'm sorry. It's terrible.
Very hypocritical Christians, and I've met some very hypocritical Scientologists. So I can't really make a value judgment between them.
All right. I will say that most, so far I've already talked to a few, but most ex-Scientologists that I've come across are some of the most decent people I've ever met. Just want to make sure that's clear. Number 5, true or false? You will end up writing more books before this is over.
Yeah, that's true. I'm working on something, but I can't talk about it yet.
Excellent. Looking forward to it. Number 6, describe, I asked Bert Leahy this, and he said insidious. So let me ask you, number 6, describe Scientology in one word.
Bully.
Bully is a good word. Number 7, sum up Marty Rathbun in a few words, if you could.
Enigma.
Enigma's good. He reminds me now. After experiencing the Unbreakable Miss Lovely, he kind of reminds me of Nibs a little bit in some of his behavior. But we'll move on. Number 8, true or false? There is a big difference between taking action and being a groupie out of curiosity.
Well, are you trying to slam somebody on that one? I can't tell. I'm just, I think there's nothing. I think there's nothing wrong with just being curious about a subject and reading about it. And I encourage people just to come and read the website and hang out with us, whether or not you're ever going to end up, holding a picket sign or whatever. I have respect for people that are activists and try to make things happen, but I don't think there's anything wrong with just being a curious reader who likes to know what's happening.
Well, I think that's the important part, is the being informed part, rather than just jumping in. And I think that you answered that well. Well, you didn't answer true or false, but you answered it well. I think you gave the best answer. Number 9, cigars, cigarettes, or that shit will kill you.
I've never smoked anything.
Excellent.
I have a not wonderful respiratory system. I was asthmatic as a kid, and so I've never been tempted. So yeah,
I hate stuff. Number 10, I decided to do something a little bit, something here that I think would be cool to hear you do. I sum up things on Come Get Some here, and I'm summing up Tony Ortega. Do me a favor, Tony. On number 10, sum up Paulette Cooper.
She's an acerbic kick in the ass.
I like it. I like it. Is there anything else you want to say? Any message you want to put out, or anything you want to promote?
That's why I love hanging out with her. It's always fun. She's a treasure, man.
Yeah, I really hope I can get in contact with her and get her on the show. I don't want her. I feel like if I want to talk to her, I'm bothering her though, because she's been through so much.
Yeah, I mean, well, at some point while we were spending that 2 years, and I would dig into particularly 73. If you're asking her about 1973, it does get her down, and she just. But I've seen her in interviews. She's great. She understands that she's got this stature as for what she went through, and so she's great. When she was on Leah Remini's show, I thought she did a wonderful job explaining a lot in a small amount of time. So she's good at that. But yeah, I would spend all day. We would be talking about a particular thing in 1973, and then she would just like, you gotta give me some time to recover from that, And so I understood.
Oh, excellent. I was asking you earlier. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off when you're talking about Paulette. Is there anything else you want to promote? Anything else you want to say to the people listening?
Oh, I just hope they join us at TonyOrtega.org at the Underground Bunker and join the conversation. And I've got links there to information about the book, The Unbreakable This Lovely. It's at Amazon, and there's now an Audible version if you want to hear me read it. That's it for now. So I'll just meet at the bunker and keep an eye on what's happening.
All right, I'll say this. Because I was cramming to get it in, because I had not read it yet or finished reading it yet, I grabbed the audio version, and it's the funniest thing to hear Tony Ortega read that little poem that Paulette Cooper read once, by the way. But it was very funny. All right, so please stay on the line, but I do want to thank you for coming on the show. I really appreciate it, and it really means a lot, Tony. I appreciate it.
You bet. I've had a great time.
All right, take care.
All right, so Tony Ortega there. So number 8 was about groupies versus someone taking action or an actual interest, which really speaks to the whole claim of the idea of an anti-Scientology cult. I really feel like that's a stigma that people are trying to put on critics of Scientology. I mean, it is easy, right? It is easy to be curious. It's easy to be the housewife that spends all day watching the Casey Anthony trial, right? And really just really get emotionally invested in something that doesn't affect you directly. But I really do believe the anti-Scientology community that I've interacted with and that many people are finding themselves involved in has been really of a true interest and concern for fellow human beings. And I think to have that bastardized by the, I don't know if that's the right word, but to have it criticized and turned and twisted into something less than what it is, I find distressing and disturbing. For instance, I feel like I said earlier on social media this weekend, I said, sure, don't attack people. Don't incite violence. Don't be okay with violence. But, because someone would suggest, we won't mention names, but someone has suggested, once you start going back at Scientology, just because there's Scientologists that are critical, you become the Scientologist. And honestly, I feel like that once you refuse to defend yourself because you're so worried on pins and needles about what you're saying is going to be twisted and used against you, then you're being controlled by Scientology when you don't speak up for yourself. So definitely defend yourself, but please keep in mind the distinction between defending yourself and retaliation. Retaliation is not good. So my point is that the entire thing about the anti-Scientology cult is bullshit, and I don't have any problem with calling it out as bullshit. In the meantime, I really thank you guys for listening. I want to thank Tony Ortega, and I want to thank Phil Jones for their time and being involved. Remember, it's 10:30 a.m. a couple blocks away from the Big Blue building there with Phil Jones. Billboard dedication tomorrow, TonyOrtega.org for Tony Ortega's site. Next week on the Thursday show, ex-Green Bay Packer and actor Michael Montgomery, whose most recent credits are Showtime's The Roadies and Gotham. So he's also, like I said, he's an ex-Green Bay Packer as well. It's going to be a fun conversation. So I'll have him on Thursday. On Friday next week, come back with yet another solid show. We'll be talking to Paul Wysong, and you'll be hearing from Aaron Smith-Levin. And we'll be talking about why his wife wasn't on the show, and we'll talk more about his situation. And you'll get more information than you got ever before. It's an opportunity for someone who is on a show that naysayers call scripted, and see that they are a real human being and their story is really theirs. There's nothing to script. There's nothing to set up. And in the format of a podcast like this, you'll get to see that play out. So please come back next Friday for that. In the meantime, Lori Hodgson was so happy with the response she got. This is more than about numbers for my show, more than about listens for my show. I am so inspired and encouraged by you, the listeners, by you, my fellow human beings, in a time where there's so much question about where people's real intentions lie. I'm seeing a lot of goodness, and it's inspiring and encouraging to me. I hope it's inspiring and encouraging to you. Please keep spreading that podcast. We wanted to go viral, not to make it a viral podcast, but to make sure that message potentially reaches Lori's kids. And if you have a similar situation and you want me to help you out with, I'll do that for you. As you see, and I've been doing this the last few weeks, just throwing a little something extra in there to help somebody. Next week, see you then. For now, that about sums it up. Stay connected. Thank you, everybody, for the support. It's been a great year.
You have been listening to Come Get Some Extra on Blog Talk Radio, iTunes, YouTube, and many other streaming services where available. As always, stay connected, and that about sums it up.